After my husband's affair with my best friend, I lost everything, my job, my home, even my self-worth. He said I'd never rise again. While staying in a rundown motel, I discovered an old suitcase with my name on it. Inside were $70,000 in cash, a plane ticket, and a note that said, "This is just travel money. The real fortune awaits at this address." When I arrived and saw what was waiting, my entire life changed instantly. The man I loved, the man I married, looked me dead in the eye and gave me an ultimatum: apologize to the woman he was secretly betraying me with, or he'd walk. Can you even fathom that kind of twisted injustice? What the hell do you even do in a moment like that? He stood there in our living room, arms crossed, throwing those words at me like they were just another business negotiation, not a wrecking ball aimed straight at our 5-year marriage. His face. God, it was set in that infuriating expression I'd come to know so well over the past few months. That look that just screamed I was being unreasonable, jealous, totally impossible. The one that made me question my own sanity, even when my gut was absolutely screaming that I was right. I stared at him, this man I'd promised to love and cherish, and the terrifying truth hit me: I didn't recognize him anymore. Or maybe, just maybe, I'd never truly known him at all. Because the Mason I thought I married? He wouldn't demand I apologize to his best friend for the simple crime of noticing their inappropriate relationship. The Mason I thought I married wouldn't gaslight me into believing I was the problem, when his emotional affair with Scarlett Pierce had been unfolding right under my nose for years. You want me to apologize to her? My voice, surprisingly calm despite the hurricane brewing inside me, cut through the silence. For what, exactly? Mason's voice rose, each word a venomous accusation, painting himself as the innocent victim. For treating her with suspicion and coldness since the day you met her. For making her feel unwelcome in our lives. For being so jealous, you can't accept I have a meaningful friendship outside our marriage. Scarlett's been nothing but kind to you, and you've hurt her feelings with your constant attitude. She deserves an apology. And if you can't give her that, then I don't know if I can stay in this marriage. In that exact moment, something snapped inside me. Not heartbreak, not yet. That would come later, in waves. What I felt was clarity. Cold. Sharp. Like a blade. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Arya Montgomery, and for 5 years, I genuinely thought I had a rock-solid marriage. Let me take you back to the beginning, back to when I still believed in the beautiful life Mason and I were building together. We met at a summer barbecue, one of those perfect July afternoons where the air hums with possibility. He was by the drink cooler, and when I walked up, he looked at me with this genuine, open smile that completely disarmed me. I forgot all about playing it cool. We talked for 3 hours straight, just sitting on the back porch steps, the party swirling around us. He listened when I talked about my graphic design work, asking thoughtful, curious questions. And he spoke with such real enthusiasm about his logistics company. Not the fake interest some guys put on just to get to talk about themselves. What really got me, though, was his attention to detail. Our first real date, he remembered I took my coffee with just a splash of cream, no sugar. He surprised me with bookstore dates because I'd once mentioned loving the smell of old books. He made me feel seen. Truly seen. In a way I'd never experienced. Like he was actually interested in who I was, not who he wanted me to be. Our wedding happened 2 years later. Small, meaningful, in a garden strung with fairy lights and wild flowers. Just our closest family and friends. I still remember Mason tearing up during his vows. My mom pulled me aside at the reception and said she'd never seen me look happier. We settled into our 2-bedroom apartment. Life felt stable, predictable, comfortable. We split bills, cooked together, talked about buying a house, kids, travel. I thought I knew exactly who I'd married and what our future held. Looking back now, I realize I was living in a carefully constructed illusion. I only saw what Mason wanted me to see. That illusion started cracking about 6 months into our marriage. Mason came home one evening radiating excitement. He sat me down on the couch and told me his college best friend, Scarlett, was moving back to town. He described her with this nostalgic warmth, brilliant, charismatic, his closest friend during their last 2 years of college. I was genuinely happy for him. Everyone needs good friends, especially the ones who knew you before you became you. When I finally met Scarlett at a dinner Mason organized, she was exactly as he described, polished, confident, professionally dressed, attractive in a carefully maintained way. What struck me immediately, though, was how she and Mason fell into an easy rhythm. They laughed about professors I'd never met, reminisced about road trips I hadn't been on, finished each other's sentences. I sat there smiling and nodding, trying to participate, but mostly feeling like an observer. Their shared history created a language I didn't speak. Scarlett's husband, Elijah, was there, too. A quiet man who seemed equally peripheral. He caught my eye at one point while Mason and Scarlett were laughing, and we shared a brief, knowing look. I didn't understand it then, but later, I'd recognize it as a mutual acknowledgement of our secondary status. The first small boundary violation happened so subtly, I almost didn't notice. Weeks after that dinner, Scarlett started texting Mason during our date nights. We'd be at a movie, his phone would buzz. He'd glance, type a quick response, then put it away with an apologetic smile. 5 minutes later, it would buzz again. By the time the movie started, he'd exchanged a dozen messages with Scarlett about some work presentation. He'd apologize, promise to put it away, but his attention was always pulled back like a magnetic force. This pattern repeated for months. Dinner dates interrupted. Weekend plans disrupted by phone calls about Scarlett's marriage problems. Late evenings where Mason typed responses while we supposedly watched TV together. Each time I gently suggested he text her back later, he'd look at me with barely concealed disappointment, as if I was failing some fundamental test of understanding. Then came the spare key incident. Mason gave Scarlett a key to our apartment for emergencies without discussing it with me first. I found out when I came out of my home office one Tuesday afternoon to find Scarlett sitting on our couch, shoes off, completely at home in my space while Mason made her coffee. She needed our Wi-Fi for a client call. Hers had gone down again. I stood there in my own living room, feeling like an intruder. When she finally left, I asked Mason if we could set some boundaries. Maybe Scarlett could text before coming over. His response was immediate and defensive. Scarlett's going through a difficult transition. New city, struggling marriage, high-pressure job. Real friends show up without conditions. Are you really going to be the kind of person who puts convenience over compassion? That conversation became a template for dozens more. Every time I tried to establish a boundary, Mason reframed it as me being unwelcoming, jealous, unable to handle his friendships. I started second-guessing my own instincts. Was I being possessive? Unreasonable? Maybe this was what mature adult friendships looked like, and I was just too insecure. Our 5th anniversary arrived. I'd booked reservations 2 months in advance at Meridian, an elegant restaurant. I wore the emerald dress Mason had loved on one of our first dates. I'd planned the whole evening, dinner, a walk along the river walk, then home where I had a gift waiting, a custom leather-bound photo album documenting our relationship. We made it halfway through our appetizers before Mason's phone started buzzing. Once, twice, 5 times in rapid succession. Each notification fractured his attention a little more until he was barely present, eyes glued to the screen. I watched myself become invisible in real time. That's when I finally said it. Mason, it's our anniversary. He looked up with genuine confusion. Scarlett's having a crisis, he said. I'm just letting her know she's not alone. But I was alone, sitting across from my husband at an expensive restaurant on what should have been one of the most important nights of our year, while he provided emotional support to another woman. The irony was suffocating, bitter in my mouth. That night, lying in bed while Mason slept peacefully beside me, I finally admitted to myself what I'd been avoiding for months. My marriage had 3 people in it, and I was the least important one. 3 months passed after that anniversary dinner. 3 months of me trying to convince myself I was overreacting. 3 months of swallowing my instincts and forcing smiles while Scarlett continued using her spare key to drop by unannounced, and Mason continued prioritizing her texts over our conversations. Then my laptop died. On a Wednesday morning in early December, right in the middle of a critical client project, the screen just went black. Deadline, end of day. Panic set in. I needed my files fast. Mason's laptop was in his home office. He'd told me dozens of times I could use it, that we had no secrets. I grabbed it without hesitation, powered it up, and logged into my cloud storage. An hour in, I needed our tax documents to verify some business expenses. Mason kept all our financial docs on his laptop. I opened his file explorer and navigated to where he usually kept our shared documents. That's when I saw it. Buried among work files and random downloads, in a way that suggested it was deliberately hidden, but not quite well enough, a folder labeled Personal Private. Something about those 2 words made my stomach clench. Mason and I didn't keep secrets. We operated on honesty. Or so I believed. Why would he need a private folder on a laptop he'd told me I could use freely? My hands trembled. Part of me knew I should close the laptop. Ask him directly. Part of me hoped for something innocent. Maybe a surprise birthday plan. I clicked it open. Hundreds of files. Photos, screenshots, documents spanning back 3 years. My eyes tried to make sense of what I was seeing, my brain scrambling before the emotional impact could hit. Mason and Scarlett sitting across from each other at restaurant tables I didn't recognize, leaning in close. Conversation far more intimate than casual friendship. Candid shots of Scarlett laughing, her face glowing. Selfies of them, his arm around her, both smiling like they shared something precious and private. And then the screenshots. Dozens of text message conversations. I clicked on the first one, hands numb. Timestamp, 2 a.m., 6 months ago. Scarlett had written a long paragraph about feeling lost in her marriage, wondering if she'd made the right choices, missing the connection she used to feel with people who really understood her. Mason's response was equally long, validating every feeling, sharing his own thoughts about paths not taken and connections that transcend normal friendship boundaries. I opened another, a year ago, late at night. Scarlett couldn't sleep, thinking about different versions of her life. Mason responded with understanding, his own confessions about what-if scenarios, regrets he couldn't articulate to most people. My client deadline was completely forgotten. I sat frozen, clicking through screenshot after screenshot, watching a hidden relationship unfold in agonizing detail. These weren't casual friend check-ins. These were emotional confessions, intimate late-night conversations where 2 people shared their deepest feelings, regrets, and longings. Then I found the message. The one that would replay in my mind for months, burned into my memory like acid-etching glass. Scarlett sent it at 2:17 a.m. about 8 months ago, right when Mason had started seeming distant and preoccupied at home. It read, "Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if we'd gotten together instead of just staying friends back in college. Do you ever think about that?" Mason's response came 3 minutes later. 3 minutes. Meaning he'd either been awake waiting for her message, or thinking about her at 2 a.m. instead of sleeping next to his wife. His reply, "More than I probably should, but we made our choices. Doesn't mean I don't value what we have now." I read those words 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, hoping they would rearrange themselves into something less devastating, something that could be explained away as innocent friendship. But the meaning was crystal clear. My husband had feelings for Scarlett that went far beyond friendship. He'd been thinking about alternate lives where they were together, and he valued whatever they had enough to maintain it through years of secret communication. The worst part? The time stamp. 2:20 a.m. While I'd been sleeping in our bed, probably worried about a work project, Mason had been engaging in emotional intimacy with another woman, discussing hypothetical romantic relationships they could have had. I couldn't stop myself. Pandora's box was open. I needed to see everything, no matter how much it hurt. I closed the screenshots and opened our joint credit card statements online. I searched for patterns. Every Tuesday afternoon for the past 2 years, a charge appeared at Riverbend Cafe, an upscale bistro downtown that Mason had never once mentioned or suggested we visit together. The amounts were consistently between $50 and $70. 2 people having a nice lunch. I opened Mason's digital calendar. Plain as day, once I knew what to look for, every Tuesday at noon, a recurring appointment labeled simply lunch meeting. No client names, no location, just a vague block that had been on his calendar for years. The dates of the Riverbend Cafe charges matched perfectly with photos in his hidden folder. While I'd been at home working on freelance projects, eating leftovers at my desk, assuming my husband was grabbing a quick bite between meetings, he'd been having weekly, secret lunch dates with Scarlett. Dates that required 2 full hours. Significant money. A pattern maintained for years. This wasn't occasional friendly catch-ups. This was deliberate, sustained, carefully planned deception. Mason had been building a parallel emotional life with Scarlett. Standing dates, intimate late-night conversations, shared secrets, all while coming home to me and acting like everything was normal. I sat at that desk for 2 hours straight, my client presentation completely abandoned. I read every screenshot, documented every suspicious charge, looked at every photo, studying their body language, seeing things I'd missed before when I'd convinced myself I was paranoid. The evidence wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't a few questionable texts. This was years of documented emotional intimacy, financial proof of secret meetings, photographic evidence of a relationship that crossed every boundary a married person should respect. What made it all worse was the sudden, horrifying clarity about how thoroughly I'd been manipulated. Every single time I'd expressed discomfort about Scarlett's constant presence, Mason had made me the problem. He'd called me jealous, possessive, insecure. He'd positioned himself as the patient, reasonable partner, trying to help his wife work through her unfounded suspicions. He'd made me question my own instincts until I started believing my discomfort was a personal failing. But my instincts had been screaming the truth the entire time. Every uncomfortable feeling, every moment of suspicion, every time I'd felt like the third wheel in my own marriage, all of it had been an accurate perception of a reality Mason was actively hiding from me, gaslighting me into thinking I was imagining problems that didn't exist. I finally understood why Mason defended Scarlett so fiercely. Why he prioritized her texts. Why he gave her a spare key without asking me. Why he looked at me with disappointment whenever I suggested their friendship had unhealthy dynamics. Because in Mason's mind, I wasn't his priority. Scarlett was. I was the obligation, the legal wife, the person he came home to out of commitment. Scarlett was the person he thought about at 2 a.m. The person he carved out special time for every week. The person he shared his deepest feelings and regrets with. I had become the third wheel in my own marriage. And the evidence was spread across Mason's laptop screen in undeniable detail. I sat at that desk staring at the evidence of his betrayal until the afternoon light shifted and shadows stretched across the room. My client deadline had passed hours ago. My phone had buzzed multiple times. None of it mattered. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I found a USB drive in the desk drawer and methodically copied everything. Every photo, every screenshot of their late-night conversations about roads not taken, every credit card statement showing the pattern of secret meetings spanning years. I organized it all into folders with clear labels and dates, building a case like a lawyer preparing for trial. When I finished, I sat back, waiting for something to happen inside me. I expected tears, or rage, or the kind of emotional collapse you see in movies. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity. The kind that comes after shock wears off completely and you realize you're standing in wreckage that can't be rebuilt. There was almost relief in it, knowing I hadn't been crazy or paranoid. My instincts had been right all along. I looked at the clock. 3:45 p.m. Mason would be home around 6:30, like always, expecting dinner and normal conversation. I decided to give him exactly that, at least at first. I wanted to see if he could sit across from me and pretend everything was fine, knowing what he'd been hiding. I went to the kitchen and started making dinner. Chicken with roasted vegetables, one of Mason's favorites. I set the table with our regular dishes, put on music, creating the illusion of normalcy in an apartment that suddenly felt like a stage set. Mason walked through the door at 6:02, right on schedule. He looked tired. He smiled when he saw me, came over to kiss my cheek like he had thousands of times. "Something smells good," he said, already heading to change. "Rough day with that client presentation?" "You could say that," I replied, my voice steady. He didn't know I'd spent the day discovering his emotional affair instead of working. I let him decompress for exactly 15 minutes, long enough for him to change into sweats, pour himself a glass of red wine, and settle onto the couch with his phone. I watched him scroll, probably texting Scarlett, completely oblivious. Then I walked over, his laptop already open to that hidden folder. I sat down in the armchair across from him, the coffee table between us like a barrier. I turned the screen so he could see it clearly and asked the simplest question I could formulate: "What is this?" Mason looked up from his phone, confusion crossing his face. Then I watched recognition hit him. His eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no words came out. For maybe 3 seconds, panic flashed across his features, raw, unguarded. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder. His expression shifted into defensiveness so quickly I almost missed it. "You went through my private files?" His voice rose with indignation, as if I were the one who had committed some unforgivable violation. "Arya, what the hell? Those are my personal things. You had no right to go snooping through my laptop." The audacity of it stunned me for a moment. He wasn't denying what was in the folder. He wasn't apologizing. His first instinct was to make me the villain. "I was using your laptop because mine crashed during a work deadline," I said, keeping my voice calm and level. "I needed to access our tax documents, and I found a folder labeled private that contained evidence of a years-long emotional affair with Scarlett. So, yes, I looked at it, and now I'm asking you to explain it." Mason set down his wine glass with more force than necessary. "There's nothing to explain. You're misinterpreting a friendship because you've never been able to handle me being close with Scarlett. This is exactly the kind of jealous behavior I've been trying to be patient with for months." I felt something cold settle in my chest. He was actually going to try to gaslight me, with the evidence sitting right there between us. "Mason, I read the text messages. I saw the photos from your secret Tuesday lunch dates. I found the credit card charges at Riverbend Cafe every single week for 2 years. This isn't me misinterpreting friendship. This is you having an emotional affair and lying about it." "It's not an affair." Mason stood up, pacing now, his voice taking on that exasperated tone he used when explaining something he thought should be obvious. "Scarlett and I are close friends. We have been since college. Yes, we talk about deep things. Yes, we meet for lunch regularly. That's what real friendship looks like, Arya: deep connection, emotional honesty, mutual support. Just because you don't have friendships like that doesn't mean they're inappropriate." Every sentence was a carefully constructed deflection, reframing his betrayal as my inadequacy. I'd heard these tactics before, but never so blatantly. Never, while hard evidence sat between us, proving he was lying. "She texted you at 2 a.m. asking if you ever thought about what life would have been like if you'd gotten together instead of staying friends," I said, my voice harder now. "You responded that you thought about it more than you probably should. That's not friendship, Mason. That's emotional infidelity. You're twisting things." He stopped pacing and turned to face me directly. "Taking private conversations out of context and building some narrative in your head because you're insecure about my friendships. Scarlett and I talk about hypothetical scenarios sometimes. That doesn't mean anything inappropriate is happening. The argument continued for 2 hours, circling the same points. Mason deflecting and reframing every piece of evidence. He had an explanation for everything. The late-night texts were just friends supporting each other. The secret lunches were regular catch-ups he didn't mention because he knew I'd react badly. The intimate conversations were normal for people with history. Every time I pointed out how his behavior crossed boundaries, he countered that I was the one with the problem. I was too jealous, too possessive, too insecure. I was exhausted. My head hurt. But I kept pushing because I needed him to acknowledge the truth, to stop lying and take responsibility. That's when Mason delivered the statement that would seal the fate of our marriage. He stood in the middle of our living room, arms crossed, jaw set. His voice took on that patronizing tone, the one that suggested he was the adult dealing with a difficult child. If anything, Arya, you owe Scarlett an apology. The words hung in the air. I stared at him, genuinely shocked into silence. She has been nothing but kind to you over the years, Mason continued, warming to his argument. She's tried to include you, tried to be friendly, and you've treated her with suspicion and coldness since the day you met her. She knows you don't like her. She's told me it hurts her feelings how you act around her, how you always try to limit our friendship. He was actually doing this. He was trying to make his emotional affair partner the victim, and me the aggressor who needed to apologize. You want me to apologize to her? My voice, still oddly calm despite the rage building, cut through the silence. For what, exactly? For noticing that my husband was having an emotional affair? For being uncomfortable with inappropriate boundaries? For trusting my instincts when you've spent months trying to convince me they were wrong? For being jealous and possessive and unable to handle me having close friendships? Mason's voice rose with each word. For making Scarlett feel unwelcome and judged when she's done nothing wrong. She deserves an apology. And if you can't give her that, then I seriously need to reconsider this marriage. The room went absolutely silent. Even the background music seemed to fade away. Mason stood there, arms crossed, expression set, clearly believing he held all the power. He thought he was calling my bluff, forcing me to choose between my pride and my marriage. He had no idea what he'd just done. Something shifted inside me in that silence. Cold. Clear. Absolutely certain. I looked at my husband, this man who was demanding I apologize to his emotional affair partner for the crime of noticing their inappropriate relationship, and realized he just handed me the perfect weapon. If Mason wanted an apology, he would get one, just not the kind he was expecting. I let the silence stretch, watching him stand there in his self-righteous certainty. Then I spoke in a voice much calmer than I felt inside. Fine. Mason's expression shifted to surprise. He'd clearly expected more argument. I'll apologize to Scarlett, I continued, my tone completely reasonable. But let's do it properly. At her house. With Elijah there, too. If I'm going to apologize for hurting her feelings, I want to do it right, in front of both of our spouses, so everyone can hear what I have to say. Mason's face lit up with relief and something that looked disturbingly like triumph. He actually smiled, believing he'd won, that he'd successfully broken me into compliance. Really? You'll do that? His voice was eager, pleased with himself. Absolutely, I said. Schedule it for this Saturday evening. I want to make sure everyone's there. I'll prepare what I want to say. Mason nodded enthusiastically, already pulling out his phone to text Scarlett. I watched him type, watched his face relax for the first time all evening, and felt absolutely nothing but cold clarity. He had no idea what I was actually planning. No comprehension that he just arranged the perfect stage for me to detonate the truth in front of everyone who needed to hear it. Mason spent the rest of that evening texting Scarlett. I watched him, this man who believed he just won some significant victory, and felt nothing but cold determination settling deeper into my bones. The next morning, Thursday, I woke up with absolute clarity. Mason left for work, kissing my forehead, reminding me to think about my apology. The moment his car pulled out, I returned to his laptop. I spent 3 hours methodically documenting everything. Detailed screenshots of every damaging conversation, organized chronologically. The early messages were friendly enough, but they shifted gradually, crossing boundaries incrementally. By the second year, Scarlett was texting him late at night about feeling disconnected from Elijah. Mason responded with paragraphs, validating her feelings, sharing his own struggles. They started using pet names, saying things like, "You always know exactly what I need to hear." I organized it all by year and month, creating a timeline impossible to dismiss. Then I compiled the financial evidence. Our joint credit card statements, highlighting every Tuesday lunch charge at Riverbend Cafe for 2 years. Over $7,000 spent on meals with another woman while we were supposedly saving for a house down payment. Then I found something that made my stomach turn in a different way. Buried in Mason's email inbox, receipts for gifts he'd purchased for Scarlett. A designer silk scarf from Nordstrom, $250. An expensive bottle of French wine, $180. Flowers delivered to her office, $75, with a card that read, "Always knew you could do it. So proud of you." These weren't casual friend gestures. These were gifts for someone you were romantically involved with. The card message crossed every platonic boundary imaginable. I printed everything, created digital backups in 3 separate cloud storage accounts, and saved copies to 2 USB drives. I wasn't taking any chances. By Thursday afternoon, I had an airtight case. But I still had one more thing to do, something that required courage I wasn't sure I possessed. I needed to call Elijah Pierce. I sat staring at my phone for 10 minutes. I'd probably spoken directly to Elijah fewer than a dozen times. He was quiet, reserved, but I'd seen something in his eyes lately, a kind of resigned awareness, suggesting he knew more than he was saying. The same look I'd probably been wearing. My finger hovered over the call button. Was this going too far? But the part of me that had been gaslit for months knew Elijah deserved a warning. He deserved to know his world was about to change. I pressed call. He answered on the 3rd ring. "This is Elijah." "Hi, Elijah. It's Arya Montgomery, Mason's wife." I kept my voice steady. A brief pause. "Arya, is everything okay? I'm calling because Mason has arranged for me to come to your house on Saturday evening to apologize to Scarlett. He insisted it happen in front of both of you, and I wanted to make sure you'd be home for it." Another pause. Longer. I could almost hear him processing the layers beneath my words. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, more alert, focused. "I'll be there." No questions about what the apology was for. Just immediate understanding. "Thank you," I said quietly. Then, because I needed him to understand what was really happening, "I think there are some things you should know. Things that have been going on that you might have suspected but didn't have proof of." The silence was heavy with recognition. Finally, Elijah spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for calling me." Those 5 words carried the weight of years of suspicion, of being told he was paranoid, of watching his wife's attention directed towards someone else while being made to feel like the problem. "You deserve to know the truth," I said. "We both do." "I'll be there Saturday," he repeated. "And Arya? Whatever you're planning to say, I'm ready to hear it." We hung up. I sat there, feeling the weight of what I'd just set in motion. Elijah knew something was coming. He'd be prepared, alert, watching for the truth. Meanwhile, Mason came home that evening in an excellent mood. He'd apparently had lunch with Scarlett that day. Their regular Tuesday shifted to Thursday. He talked enthusiastically about how grateful Scarlett was that I'd agreed to apologize, how much it would mean to her to clear the air, how this would strengthen all of our relationships. I nodded and smiled, internally reviewing my compiled evidence. Friday was more of the same. Mason coached me repeatedly on what to say. He'd actually written out bullet points, acknowledge my jealousy, admit I'd misinterpreted their friendship, thank Scarlett for her patience, express gratitude that she'd give me another chance. He even suggested I bring an expensive bottle of wine as a peace offering. Really? Show her you're serious about making amends, he'd said earnestly. I agreed to everything. I practiced the humble facial expressions, asked clarifying questions about tone and body language, making him think I was genuinely preparing to deliver the apology he'd scripted. With each coaching session, Mason's confidence grew. His shoulders relaxed. He smiled more easily. He truly believed he had successfully trained his wife to perform public submission. Friday evening, he actually hugged me. I'm proud of you for being mature enough to work through your issues, he said. I hugged him back, feeling the unfamiliar weight of deliberate deception. I'd never been good at lying, but something had shifted inside me. I'd learned from the master. That night, I lay in bed next to Mason, listening to him breathe peacefully, completely unaware that tomorrow would detonate his carefully constructed world. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept circling. Was I becoming vindictive? Was public humiliation the answer, or was I just hurt and lashing out? Did Elijah really deserve to have his marriage destroyed in front of witnesses? But every time doubt crept in, I remembered specific moments. Mason's face illuminated by his phone screen at our anniversary dinner. The disappointed looks he'd given me whenever I tried to set boundaries. The patient, patronizing tone he used. The way he'd made me question my own sanity, all while maintaining a hidden emotional affair that proved I'd been right all along. I thought about all the women who stay silent because speaking truth makes other people uncomfortable, who apologize for being right, who shoulder blame for other people's betrayals. And I realized that what I was planning wasn't petty revenge. It was justice, clarity, and the kind of truth-telling that shatters comfortable lives people have been living in for too long. When dawn finally broke, painting the walls with pale gold light, I got up with absolute certainty. I wasn't nervous anymore. I wasn't second-guessing. I was ready to deliver the apology Mason had demanded, just not the one he'd scripted. Saturday had arrived, and by evening everyone would finally know the truth. Saturday arrived with clear skies. I moved through our apartment like someone preparing for battle. Mason interpreted my quiet focus as nervousness. He kept reassuring me that Scarlett was genuinely looking forward to clearing the air. I let him believe whatever he needed to believe. By 5 p.m., I was dressed in a simple navy dress. Respectful. Understated. Mason had picked out the expensive French wine that morning, wrapping it carefully. He treated it like a peace offering that would seal our reconciliation. We left at 6:15 for the 25-minute drive to Scarlett and Elijah's house. Mason insisted we take his car, arrive together, presenting a united front. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally patting my knee. He talked the entire drive about how meaningful this was, how proud he was of me, how our marriage would be stronger. I watched suburban streets slide past. Houses, families, people out enjoying the evening. None of them had any idea that in one of those similar-looking houses, our lives were about to detonate in ways that couldn't be put back together. Mason kept glancing at me, a hopeful expression mixed with nervousness. Part of him probably wondered if I'd actually go through with his apology. I gave him nothing. My expression remained neutral, perhaps slightly anxious, the way someone might look before an uncomfortable but necessary conversation. I held the wine bag. I nodded when he talked. I smiled when he squeezed my knee. I was the picture of a contrite wife, ready to make amends. When we pulled up to Scarlett and Elijah's house at exactly 6:40, all the interior lights were blazing. I could see Scarlett arranging something on their coffee table. Even from the car, I could tell she'd gone to effort for this, setting the stage for what she believed would be her validation and my public submission. Mason parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment. Then he turned to me with an expression of such genuine emotion, I almost felt sorry for him. "Thank you for doing this," he said quietly. "I know it's not easy, but this means everything to me, Arya. Everything. Our marriage is going to be so much stronger after tonight. You'll see." I looked at my husband, this man who had gaslit me for months, who had demanded I apologize to his affair partner, who genuinely believed this evening would strengthen our marriage by cementing another woman's permanent priority in his life. "I know it will," I said, and squeezed his hand back. That was the last moment Mason would look at me with trust or affection. He didn't know it yet. We walked up to the front door. Mason rang the doorbell, though Scarlett was already heading towards us. She opened the door before the chime finished, her smile wide, barely concealing her smugness. She looked perfect, of course. Designer jeans, silk blouse, professionally styled hair, flawless makeup. She'd clearly dressed for this occasion. "Mason, Arya, come in." Her voice was warm, welcoming, playing the gracious host. "I'm so glad we're doing this. Really, clearing the air will be good for all of us." Mason handed her the wine. Scarlett made appreciative noises about the label, though I noticed she set it aside without much genuine interest. She was focused on me, studying my face, trying to gauge how thoroughly Mason had broken me. Elijah appeared from the kitchen. The moment our eyes met, I saw everything I needed to know. He was alert, watchful, braced for impact. His expression had none of the resigned exhaustion I'd seen at previous social gatherings. He knew something significant was about to happen. And unlike Mason and Scarlett, he was prepared for it to be uncomfortable. "Arya, Mason." He nodded to both of us, his voice neutral. Then his eyes found mine again for a fraction of a second, and I saw acknowledgement there. Recognition, maybe even gratitude. We moved into their living room. Scarlett and Elijah settled onto their gray sectional couch, close enough to appear united, but with enough space between them that suggested the distance in their marriage. Mason and I took matching armchairs across from them, a glass coffee table creating a barrier. The coffee table held wine glasses, a carefully arranged cheese board, small plates. Scarlett had clearly spent time staging the scene. The room itself felt theatrical under the bright lighting, like we were all actors who'd been given scripts, except only I knew what the real plot was about to be. Mason settled into his chair, giving me an encouraging nod. His expression radiated barely contained excitement mixed with relief. He thought he'd won. Scarlett folded her hands in her lap with gracious expectation, her posture perfect, her expression carefully arranged into magnanimous forgiveness. She was ready to receive my contrition. Elijah leaned back slightly, arms crossed loosely, watching everything with focused intensity. He was the only person in that room besides me who understood that something was about to shift. I took a deliberate breath and set my wine glass on the coffee table. The sound of glass meeting would seem unnaturally loud in the expectant silence. I looked directly at Scarlett, holding her gaze, and began speaking in a voice that was calm, measured, and gave nothing away. "Scarlett, I want to start by saying that Mason was absolutely right." I paused, letting those words settle, watching her smile widen slightly with validation. "I do owe you an apology." Another pause. Scarlett's posture relaxed fractionally. Mason's face lit up with relief. Elijah's expression didn't change at all, but I saw his eyes sharpen. "But not for the reasons you think." The atmosphere in that living room shifted so dramatically, I could almost feel the air pressure change. Mason's encouraging smile faltered, froze on his face. Scarlett's expression transformed from gracious acceptance to cautious uncertainty. Elijah leaned forward slightly, his full attention locked on me, every muscle in his body alert. I continued in that same calm, measured voice, not raising my volume or changing my tone, just speaking truth with the kind of clarity that comes from absolute certainty. "I apologize for staying silent when I should have spoken up years ago. I apologize for allowing you and Mason to continue an emotional affair right under my nose while convincing myself I was the crazy one for feeling uncomfortable." Mason tried to interrupt, his voice sharp with warning. "Arya, what are you, I raised my hand, cutting him off mid-sentence without even looking at him. My eyes stayed locked on Scarlett's face, watching her carefully constructed facade begin to crack. Let me finish. You demanded an apology. I'm giving you one. Then I turned my attention to Elijah, whose face had gone completely still. I pulled out my phone, hand steady, opened the folder I'd so carefully organized, and began speaking in that same measured tone. I apologized to Elijah, actually, because he deserved to know the truth about his wife long before tonight. For the past 3 years, Mason and Scarlett have been meeting every Tuesday for secret lunch dates at Riverbend Cafe. They've been having late-night text conversations about alternative life choices they wish they'd made together, about intimate regrets and emotional connections that cross every boundary a married person should respect. I handed my phone directly to Elijah, watching his face as he took it with trembling hands. His eyes moved across the screen, reading the first message, then scrolling to the next, then the next. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like he might be sick. But his hands kept moving, kept scrolling, methodically reviewing every piece of evidence I'd compiled. Mason was on his feet now, his voice rising with panic. Elijah, don't listen to this. She's taking things completely out of context. You know how Arya gets about my friendship with Scarlett. She's always been jealous and now she's trying to destroy. How long? Elijah's voice cut through Mason's explanation like a blade through paper. He didn't raise his volume. He didn't need to. The coldness in those 2 words silenced everything else in the room. He was still looking at my phone, still scrolling through messages, but his question was directed at Scarlett with absolute precision. The room fell into a silence so complete I could hear someone's watch ticking. Scarlett's mouth opened and closed several times. Her perfectly composed expression had cracked completely now, tears forming in her carefully made-up eyes. She tried the reflexive denial first, her voice shaking. It's not what it looks like. Mason and I are just close friends. We've always been close. There's nothing physical between us. Nothing inappropriate has actually happened. Elijah finally looked up from my phone, and the expression on his face made even me take a step back. It wasn't rage, exactly, though that was there. It was something colder and more devastating. Recognition. Vindication. Years of suppressed suspicion finally given permission to surface. I didn't ask if you slept with him, Elijah said, his voice still controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of fury that was more frightening than shouting would have been. I asked how long you've been having an emotional affair with Mason while making me feel crazy for noticing. The parallel to my own experience was so perfect it felt orchestrated. We had both been living the same nightmare of gaslighting and manipulation, just from different angles and different marriages. Both told we were paranoid or insecure or unable to handle mature adult friendships. Both made to feel like the problem while our spouses maintained an inappropriate relationship right in front of us. Scarlett's carefully maintained facade shattered completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Elijah, please. You're misunderstanding. We never meant for anything to. 3 years, Elijah's voice was flat, reading from the timestamps on my phone. According to these messages, this has been going on for at least 3 years. 3 years of secret lunches. 3 years of late-night conversations about regretting your life choices. 3 years of you telling him things you never told me. He scrolled further, his jaw tightening. Here's one from 8 months ago where Scarlett asks Mason if he ever thinks about what life would have been like if he'd gotten together instead of staying friends. And Mason responds that he thinks about it more than he probably should. Mason had found his voice again, but instead of apologizing or acknowledging the truth, he went straight into damage control. He was standing now, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and humiliation, pointing at me like I was the one who had committed some unforgivable betrayal. Arya, you're destroying everything. This isn't what I meant when I asked you to apologize. You twisted what I asked you to do. You've taken private conversations completely out of context, and you're using them as weapons to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. His voice cracked with desperation as he tried to reframe the entire situation. Tried to make my truth-telling seem like manipulation or revenge, rather than simple honesty. He turned to Elijah, palms up in a placating gesture. "Look, Elijah, you have to understand. Scarlett and I have been close friends since college. We have history. Yes, maybe we talk more than typical friends do. Maybe we're more emotionally connected than some people might think is appropriate, but nothing physical has ever happened between us. We've never crossed that line. Arya's jealousy has blown a close friendship completely out of proportion." But Elijah wasn't listening to Mason's revised narrative. He was still scrolling through my phone, reading message after message where Mason and Scarlett crossed boundaries that no amount of explanation could justify. His expression grew colder and more closed with each screen. "It says here, you bought her a designer scarf for her birthday," Elijah said quietly, reading from the email receipt I'd included. $2.50. And expensive wine for her promotion. Flowers sent to her office. He looked up at Scarlett. "You told me those flowers were from a grateful client." Scarlett's tears were flowing freely now. "Elijah, I can explain, how much?" Elijah cut her off. "How much money has Mason spent on you over the past 3 years while telling me we needed to be more careful with our budget?" Mason's attempts to control the narrative were falling apart in real time. The evidence spoke louder than his deflections, and Elijah was clearly someone who trusted facts over explanations. I stood up slowly, smoothing my navy dress and picking up my purse while Mason continued his desperate explanations to an audience that had stopped listening. The time had come for me to leave, to walk away from the explosion I'd detonated and let it burn through whatever was left. I looked at Mason directly, meeting his eyes for what would probably be the last time with any kind of intimacy or connection between us. "You demanded I apologize for speaking truth. I just did. You told me to do it in front of Elijah. Done. You threatened me with divorce if I didn't comply. Well, Mason, consider this my answer to that threat." Then I turned to Elijah, whose expression had shifted to something complex. Painful gratitude mixed with devastation. Anger at the betrayal mixed with relief at finally having proof that he wasn't crazy. "I've sent you copies of everything to your email address. All the screenshots, all the financial records, all the evidence you need to make informed decisions about your marriage. You deserve to know the truth, and I'm genuinely sorry I didn't tell you sooner." Mason grabbed my arm as I moved toward the door. His grip was tight enough to hurt. His voice shifted from angry to pleading. "You can't just walk out. We need to talk about this, Arya, please. You're my wife. We can work through this if you just calm down and be reasonable." I pulled my arm free with more force than I had intended, leaving red marks where his fingers had been. I met his eyes one final time. "No, Mason. You need to talk to your lawyer. Because I'm done being the understanding wife in a 3-person marriage where I was always the least important person." I walked toward the door. Without looking back. Behind me, I could hear Scarlett sobbing, her composure completely destroyed. I could hear Elijah's cold questions continuing, his voice controlled, but carrying that undercurrent of fury. I could hear Mason's increasingly desperate attempts to explain, but none of it was my problem anymore. I stepped out into the cool October evening air and closed the door behind me, muffling the sounds of their imploding marriages. The suburban street was quiet, peaceful, completely at odds with the devastation I'd just left. I pulled up my phone with shaking hands and called for a ride share. The driver arrived within 10 minutes. I climbed into the back seat and gave him my address, then spent the entire drive staring out the window at suburban streets passing by, houses with lights on and families inside. People living their normal Saturday evenings, completely unaware that in one similar-looking house, 4 lives had just detonated. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty for the devastation I'd caused. I destroyed my own marriage, yes, but also Scarlett and Elijah's. I'd humiliated Mason and Scarlett publicly. but mostly I felt relieved, like I'd finally stopped carrying a weight I hadn't realized was crushing me for so long. When the rideshare dropped me off at our apartment building, I walked through the lobby and up to our floor, feeling like I was moving through a different world. I unlocked our door and stepped inside. Immediately, the space felt different, lighter, somehow, less suffocating. Mason's things were everywhere, but they all felt temporary now, like artifacts from a life that had already ended. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on our couch in the quiet apartment, and let myself feel the full weight of what came next. Part of me wondered if Mason would come home at all that night. But some deeper instinct told me he'd be back, if only to try one more time to control the narrative. His key turned in the lock at 11:47 p.m. The man who entered our apartment looked nothing like the confident husband who'd left it just 5 hours earlier. His face was ravaged, eyes red and swollen from what must have been crying. His hair stood up where he'd been running his hands through it. His shirt was wrinkled. He looked like someone who'd aged a decade in an evening. He stood in the doorway staring at me. Then he closed the door with careful control and walked into the living room. The look on his face was something I'd never seen, equal parts devastation and fury, grief and rage. "How could you do that?" His voice came out raw, scraped clean of its usual confident tone. "How could you humiliate me like that? Destroy my friendship? Share private conversations that you had no right to see in the first place?" I took another sip of wine and said nothing. I'd said everything that needed saying at Scarlett's house. Now it was Mason's turn to deal with consequences. He started pacing, jerky and agitated. "You violated my privacy. You went through my personal files, read my private messages, and then you weaponized them to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed 2 marriages because you couldn't handle me having a close friendship." This was the anger phase. Deny, deflect, attack. Make the person who discovered the betrayal into the villain. I let him pace and rant for 20 minutes. Then he shifted strategies, sitting down on the armchair, hands clasped, a posture that suggested vulnerability and remorse. "Look, I know I made mistakes," he said, his voice softer now, more reasonable. "Maybe Scarlett and I got too close. Maybe I didn't set appropriate boundaries, but we can work through this, Arya. We can go to couples therapy. I'll put distance between myself and Scarlett. Whatever you need. Our marriage is worth fighting for." This was the bargaining phase. Promising change, offering concessions, trying to negotiate a path forward that would minimize his losses. I set down my wine glass and looked at him directly. "Mason, I'm filing for divorce." His face went through another rapid evolution of expressions. Shock first, then calculation, then manipulation. His features arranged themselves into wounded confusion. "You're overreacting," he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd come to know so well. "You're emotional right now, understandably, but destroying our marriage over a friendship that you misinterpreted isn't the answer. You're letting your insecurities ruin something good. This is exactly what I was trying to help you work through." And there it was. Even now, even caught with irrefutable evidence of his emotional affair, Mason was trying to make this my failing, my insecurity, my misinterpretation. I stood up and walked to our bedroom without another word, closing and locking the door behind me. I heard Mason call after me. Heard him try the door handle. Heard him pace another hour. Around 2 a.m., I heard him finally settle on the couch, probably too exhausted to keep performing. The next morning, he tried yet another approach. The wounded husband, who just wanted to save his marriage. He called in sick to work and spent the entire day following me around our apartment. But I was done. Done fighting, done explaining, done accepting blame for other people's betrayals. On Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after I detonated our lives at Scarlett's house, I called Victoria Brennan. I'd gotten her name from a colleague. Victoria had a reputation for being thorough, uncompromising, and completely unsympathetic to spouses who tried to manipulate proceedings through gaslighting. Her office was downtown. Victoria herself was in her mid-50s, professionally dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a direct manner I found immediately reassuring. Our first consultation lasted 2 hours. I showed her everything: the screenshots, the credit card statements, the photos, the gift receipts. Victoria reviewed each piece of evidence with focused intensity. When she finished, she sat back. "Emotional affairs are harder to prove than physical ones in divorce proceedings," she said. "But the documentation you've compiled is exceptionally comprehensive. This shows a clear pattern of deception spanning years, financial evidence of resources being diverted outside the marriage, and communication that crosses appropriate boundaries. We can absolutely use this." She laid out her strategy: file for divorce on grounds of marital misconduct. Push for a favorable settlement given Mason's documented pattern of deception. Be prepared for him to claim I'd violated his privacy, but counter that I discovered the evidence accidentally while using his computer for legitimate work. "He'll try to make you the villain," Victoria said. "He'll claim you're jealous, vindictive, unable to handle his friendships. Don't let him. The evidence speaks for itself." I hired her on the spot. 2 weeks after the explosive apology, I received an email that surprised me. The sender was Elijah Pierce. The subject line: "Thank you." I opened it with curiosity. Elijah explained he'd filed for divorce the Monday after our confrontation. Armed with the evidence I'd provided, he wrote about years of suspecting something was wrong, but convincing himself he was paranoid. My apology had given him both validation and proof. He asked if we could meet for coffee sometime, carefully clarifying it wasn't romantic. He just wanted to talk with someone who understood exactly what it felt like to be the third priority in your own marriage. I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown. Elijah looked different than I'd ever seen him. The resigned exhaustion was gone, replaced by something more solid and present. He looked like someone who'd finally stopped carrying a weight. Our conversation flowed easily. No need for pretense. We'd both already seen each other at our worst. Both publicly humiliated. Both discovered our instincts had been right. Elijah told me about years of watching Scarlett's face light up when Mason called, of expressing discomfort and being told he was too sensitive. It was like listening to my own experiences reflected back. We'd been living parallel nightmares. Through mutual friends, I later learned Mason and Scarlett tried to make a real relationship work after both divorces were set in motion. The predictability of it was almost funny. Once their connection was no longer forbidden, once they had to deal with actual relationship logistics instead of stolen emotional moments, the fantasy collapsed. They lasted exactly 4 months. Mutual friends reported growing tensions. Scarlett apparently struggled with Mason's financial situation. Mason discovered that Scarlett's constant need for attention became exhausting when it was his full-time responsibility. The relationship that had seemed so special and deep when conducted through texts and secret lunches turned out to be mostly illusion. They broke up quietly, without the dramatic explosion that had marked the end of their marriages. Just a sad fizzle that proved what I'd suspected all along: what they had wasn't love. It was the thrill of a forbidden emotional affair. 6 months after that explosive Saturday night, I sat in Victoria's office signing the final divorce papers. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows. Victoria had negotiated a settlement more favorable than I'd expected. Mason agreed to split our savings, let me keep the apartment, even paid half my legal fees. Victoria suspected his unusual generosity stemmed from wanting to end proceedings quickly before more details of his relationship with Scarlett became public record. I signed my name on page after page, watching my signature legally transform me back into just Arya Montgomery. Each signature felt like closing a door that I'd been trying to shut for months. When I signed the last page, Victoria smiled. "Congratulations, you're officially divorced." I walked out of her office, carrying a folder that officially ended one chapter of my life and began another. I'd expected this moment to feel heavier, sadder. I'd expected grief for the marriage I'd believed in. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd finally removed a heavy winter coat I'd been wearing for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to move freely. The afternoon sun seemed brighter, warmer on my skin, carrying the kind of promise that comes with genuine new beginnings. My weekly coffee meetings with Elijah had continued. What started as mutual support gradually evolved into something more complicated and interesting. We talked less about past pain and more about present lives and future possibilities. He mentioned a promotion, new responsibilities. I talked about a freelance design client who gave me creative freedom. We discovered shared interests, old black and white films, hiking trails, quiet mornings where silence felt comfortable. One Wednesday afternoon in early spring, Elijah suggested we meet for dinner instead of coffee. Something about the way he asked made it clear this was a different kind of invitation. "There's a new Italian place that opened downtown," he said, a hint of nervousness I found endearing. "I thought maybe we could try it together, if you're interested." I looked at this quiet man who had survived the same betrayal. We were both gun-shy, both carrying damage that would take time to heal. But we'd built something honest between us over these months. A foundation based on truth instead of illusion. "I'd like that," I said. We took things slowly, but the foundation felt different this time. Solid in ways my marriage to Mason never had been. I ran into Mason unexpectedly one Saturday afternoon about 8 months after our divorce was finalized, in the grocery store produce section reaching for organic apples. Another hand reached for the same bag. We both pulled back, started to apologize, then recognized each other. Mason looked different. Older. More worn. New lines around his eyes, more gray hair. He'd lost weight. We stood there awkwardly. "Arya," he said finally. "How are you?" "I'm good. Working on some interesting design projects, enjoying the apartment, building a life that feels right." Mason nodded, something that might have been genuine happiness crossing his face. "I'm glad you're doing well." He looked like he wanted to say something more significant. Finally, he spoke quietly, almost too soft for me to hear. "I made mistakes. A lot of them. I handled our marriage poorly. I wish I'd listened when you tried to tell me the truth about my relationship with Scarlett." The apology was real. I could hear that. But it came far too late. Some things can't be unsaid. Some damage can't be undone. I appreciated the acknowledgement, but felt nothing beyond that. No anger anymore, no hurt. Just recognition that this was a person I used to know who taught me important lessons. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. "How's Scarlett?" I asked, because some part of me was curious. Mason's expression closed off immediately. "We broke up months ago. Turns out what we had didn't translate well into an actual relationship. Once it wasn't secret anymore," he laughed without humor. "I'm living in a studio apartment across town, working through my own process of figuring out who I am outside the fantasy I'd been maintaining." We parted cordially after that, both aware that some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. They can only be acknowledged as part of the landscape that shaped us into whoever we become next. Today, I live in an apartment that no longer carries any trace of Mason or our marriage. I redecorated completely, erasing visual reminders, replacing them with choices that reflect only my taste. The silence here isn't lonely. It's peaceful. The sound of a life reclaimed, of boundaries respected, of truth spoken without apology. Elijah and I are still taking things slow. But what we're building feels different this time. Honest instead of performed. Based on respect instead of manipulation. Built between two people who understand the value of truth because we both paid the price for living in lies. I think about that night sometimes. That explosive apology that detonated multiple lives in Scarlett's carefully staged living room. Part of me still wonders if I could have handled it differently, more privately, with less public devastation. But mostly, I understand that some truths need to be spoken loudly. They need to be witnessed by everyone who's been affected by the lies. Mason wanted me to kneel and apologize for hurting Scarlett's feelings. I gave him exactly what he demanded. I just made sure the apology revealed every uncomfortable truth he'd been working so hard to hide. The moral crystallized clearly over these months of rebuilding: never force an apology from a woman who speaks truth. Because women like me don't apologize for seeing clearly. We apologize for staying silent too long. And when we finally speak, we burn down every carefully constructed lie. Mason learned too late that forcing someone to apologize is only a victory if you control what they're apologizing for. I didn't bow for truth. I weaponized it. And in doing so, I reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is refuse to pretend anymore. The silence I live in now isn't the silence of submission. It's the silence of peace that comes after you finally stop carrying other people's lies and start living in the clear, bright light of your own truth. So, I'm curious. If you were in my shoes, faced with that kind of betrayal and gaslighting, would you have done what I did? Or would you have handled it differently? Let me know in the comments below. I'm genuinely interested to hear your thoughts.